Chair. There's been a great deal of criticism in the media of a number of the enterprise agreements with various retail outlets, which you'd obviously be aware of. And I was looking at your Form F17, the employer's statutory deck. So from what I can look at, seen there, it looks like it would work on a lot of trust. Does the Fair Work Commission rely just on the evidence submitted by employers when applications are received for approval?
Senator, Mr Furlong will assist you with that question.
Good morning, Senator. Murray Furlong, the Director of the Tribunal Services Branch. The F17 is obviously the employer statutory declaration. The draft agreement, as lodged, is published on our website on an agreements in progress page, and so any party can have a look and review the terms and conditions that reside in that enterprise agreement. And then obviously, if they feel the need, they can seek to make an application or an appearance before the Commission.
But in the first instance, it's you and the employer, correct?
It depends on who is, in terms of the F17, yes it is.
Okay, thank you. So some of it's as simple as ticking a box, so I could see how it works off a lot of trust. So on 3.6, question 3.6 on Form 17, I noticed that the evidence includes, it states that a person making the declaration thinks the agreement passes the better off overall test. So all you rely on there is for them to tick the box. Is there any other evidence that you require, or is that just what I see here?
The application is obviously made, and then a specialised team perform an analysis of the agreement as made to determine whether or not it meets a number of pre-lodgement provisions, but also that it may satisfy the BOOT, the Better Off Overall test. It is then dealt with by a member of the tribunal, who will then consider the application as made. If they require any additional information, or if they have any concerns about the accuracy of any of the information in the F17, then they can ask the employer to provide some additional information.
So if somebody's ticked companies tick the BOOT box, and then your people, as part of the process, they always investigate it, or is it just some spot checks are made? Always, or sometimes?
There is a very detailed guidance or document that our assessors go through to ensure that it complies with the number of pre-lodgement provisions.
But does everyone get checked? Every
agreement gets checked.
Okay.
Yes.
So you also rely on sample rosters that are put in from the employers. So when you come to looking at the rosters for the workers, that's all purely from the employers. Is that correct?
I think it's a matter of discretion for members of the tribunal to deal with these matters as they see fit. I can't propose to talk about the way that members will conduct their examination of an application for an agreement. But what I can say is that members have the capacity to inform themselves how they see fit. If they have any concerns about the information that's being provided, including in relation to those sample rosters, they can seek additional information. They can also, towards the end of the process, seek undertakings from the employers to make sure that if they have any concerns about particular elements of the draft agreements, that they are satisfied.
Because we have seen some of these agreements looking after leaving workers worse off, so that's what I'm trying to understand. If the Fair Work Commission relies on the evidence of the employer and relies on sample rosters submitted by the employer, which are not representative of what many employees are doing at work, the Fair Work Commission could approve an agreement which leaves many workers worse off, couldn't it?
I'm not too sure if I can answer that question clearly. What I can say is that the Better Off Overall test is applied at the point the agreement is made. If an aggrieved party has a concern about an agreement that is made, they can appeal that decision.
If you can't answer that general question, let's take the specific. Isn't that precisely what happened with regards to the Coles agreement in 2014?
I can say that in the first instance the agreement was approved, and then there was an application brought to to appeal that decision in the first instance. And in a very, very sort of high-level summary, the full bench in that matter decided that the agreement could be resolved, the issues in the agreement could be resolved with particular undertakings. My understanding is that Coles didn't accept those proposed undertakings, and so the agreement or that decision was quashed.
Senator, the other point that might assist you is the process that Mr Furlong has described, where every agreement is assessed by an administrative team with a detailed checklist before being as an input to a member in assessing whether an agreement should be approved or not, has not always been in place. It's been introduced in more recent times. The statutory obligation on members to the circumstances in which agreements can be approved or cannot be has not changed, and if there is an instance where an agreement is approved outside that statutory framework, then the Act provides some remedies, including a capacity to appeal, which is what's happened in that particular case.
So to see if I understand correctly, because from what I understand, it required an appeal to overturn the decision.
In that case.
Yes, in that case. And Ms O'Neill, you said that things haven't changed, because my question was going to be, did you learn any lessons out of this? Has the system changed? But I think you said it hasn't changed.
No, what I was saying is it has changed. So
it has changed.
The process that Mr Furlong described has not always been in place. And I don't believe it was in place in relation to the Coles matter. It's not accurate to say it was introduced in response to the Coles matter. It is just one of the ongoing reforms that the Commission has introduced, but it is a different process to what was in place at that time.
So we've had a situation where hundreds of thousands of low-paid, often securely employed workers are affected at large retail and fast food companies. Like, the question does arise, why didn't the Fair Work Commission get onto this? Like, it is extraordinary. It's huge numbers of workers, some of the most disadvantaged in the country. And we find out that it was a young man in his own time was the one who tracked this down and exposes the story. Like, I guess that it must have been embarrassing for you, but from what I'm hearing, it could actually still happen.
I would, well, the process that was in place at the time the Coles agreement was approved is not the process that's in place now. All agreements that are lodged are subject to an extensive checklist that Mr Furlong's described, and that checklist is on the website. That analysis and input, including an administrative assessment as to whether the proposed agreement passes the boot test or not, is then provided to a member with any queries or issues that have been flagged. It's ultimately up to the member to decide whether the statutory tests have been met and whether to approve an agreement or not. In the event that there are or there have been agreements that have been approved that on proper analysis do not pass the boot test, and that Coles example is the obvious one, there are limited ways that the tribunal can deal with that scenario. Under the legislation, it's not open to the Commission to, of its own motion, reopen a decision to approve or to dismiss an application for approval. The Act provides for appeals to be lodged, which is what happened in that case, and in certain circumstances reviews can be sought.
So could I ask a specific example, because from some of the complaints come to us that it certainly appears that that it's not changing for workers, particularly low-paid workers. So the example I wanted to ask about is is there an investigation being undertaken into Domino's, the pizza outlet? How is that going? And is Palmyra, Domino's largest franchise in New South Wales, being investigated? Because the complaints that I receive is that he's close to the CEO, Dan Meegee, and that is regularly known for underpaying his workers. So is this something that you're looking into?
The responsibility for investigating contraventions of modern awards and agreements in terms of the underpayments sits with the operational remit of the Fair Work Ombudsman.
Senator, they'll be on later on, just this morning. Oh well, perhaps this morning.
Right.
After the Registered Organisations Commission.
Okay, I'll come back to that. Well, I'll go back to some of my general questions. Object 3B of the Fair Work Act states ensuring a guaranteed safety net of fair, relevant and enforceable minimum terms and conditions through the National Employment Standards, Modern Awards and National Minimum Orders. So if current agreements allow workers to be paid less than the award minimum wage, then the guaranteed minimum safety net of fair and enforceable conditions set out in Object 3B is not being met, is it?
Says that's really an opinion that's the objects of the entire scheme. I'm not sure that we can assist with that.
No, it's not an opinion. It's just we've got the fact. We've got the. That's why I read it out. What Object 3B is. That's how it's supposed to work. We've got clear evidence, mounting evidence, that there is a problem that shows that we're not achieving 3B. So that's why I'm asking that question, so we can then explore why.
My concern is that it's essentially a policy question in terms of whether the Act is or isn't meeting its objectives, and that's a matter for the department rather than the agency.
I'm actually here representing the department. You're absolutely right. The agreements are required to meet the National Employment Standard and the other tests. They have to be better off overall. The difficulty that Fair Work Commissioners face is the fact that the overall can be complicated because people have very different rosters and they are working different hours. It's not a consistent, people don't work the way they used to, 9 to 5 or various overtime arrangements. So it can get very, very complicated for very large organisations to determine that every single worker working in a whole range of different ways, including prospective employees who may be employed, need to be better off overall. It is a very complicated test for the Fair Work Commission, but they are required to determine that each worker is better off overall, so you're quite right.
I mean, I think that would have some credibility if we were talking about a few workers, but considering we're talking about thousands and thousands across the country, and there's more examples coming in.
I'm not sure we're aware of the numbers, Senator. If you're talking about the Coles decision, I don't think we're aware of what numbers there are in that case. There was one person who put in an appeal.
One person who put in an appeal, but everything I've read hasn't challenged that that's how people work in those big retail outlets.
I think it's in this case it was for those ones that are on the unusual, rates that are working unusual hours as opposed to the full-time workers who are quite consistent, and it's very easy to work out their rosters and whether they are actually better off overall. The complication comes when people are working perhaps a few hours on a Sunday, different hours on a Saturday, working late nights sometimes. That's where the complication comes in.
Thank you. Just to go back to a general question about how the Commission works, what investigation has been conducted into applications for approval of agreements, including the submission of statutory declarations, which might mislead the Fair Work Commission into approving agreements?
Senator, I'll just reiterate the comments that I made previously, that the ultimate discretion about whether or not agreement is approved or not sits with a member of the tribunal, and they need to be satisfied that the information in front of them is true and accurate, and that the agreement satisfies the legislative schema in relation to the pre-lodgement provisions, including the principal approval requirement, which deals with the content of enterprise agreements, which is the Better Off Overall test.
So no investigation has been conducted after all this? That you're continued with the methods of work that you had prior to these scandals breaking?
I'd like to reiterate what the General Manager actually said in her evidence a couple of minutes ago, that the Fair Work Commission has reformed the way that it processes enterprise agreement applications significantly over the last 2 years, 2 to 3 years. And that involves a very detailed process against a checklist, which is available on the website, that to ensure that an agreement satisfies the number of the pre-lodgement provisions. In terms of the issue that you continue to raise about the statutory declaration, it is, as you be aware, it's a criminal offence to knowingly provide false and misleading information in association with a statutory declaration. And so I would hope that the people who are making those applications, and certainly the form indicates the severity of making a false declaration.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.